After the decline of Egypt's extraordinary culture, another civilization rose, Greece in the 6th century BC. It was aided by one of the most probing minds in history, Pythagoras. Our alphabet, the buildings that surround us, even the music we hear, owes a debt to this brilliant philosopher. In his pursuit of wisdom, Pythagoras traveled broadly, searching for lost occult knowledge. He found it in the mystery schools scattered throughout many different cultures. Pythagoras synthesized the elements of these teachings into a new discipline, philosophy. Its foundation, numbers.
He believed that mathematics and philosophy and an understanding of the divine all went together.
We can't say he originated anything, but he condensed and boiled down the knowledge of the world and then brought it to a practical application.
Pythagoras identified numbers as the most fundamental elements of creation.
As we look at science in this day and age, we're finding that the whole world is filled with these mathematical constants. You've got pi, you've got the speed of light, you've got the force of gravitation. So the idea that numbers describe the world seems to be the case.
In 518 BC, Pythagoras opened a school in the Croton region of southern Italy. His carefully selected disciples were called mathematicoi. Their initiation was rigorous. 3 introductory years, followed by 5 years of absolute silence, then 5 more of training. Only then were students ready to learn the most sacred mysteries of numbers.
He wanted to produce philosophers like himself, so you had to be very circumspect, you had to be very self-controlled to be able to even be in his school.
Pythagoras turned the numbering system of the Babylonians into a sacred science.
They believed that number was like God, and to connect with this was to be talking to God. And so from that arises a whole lot of symbolism that later becomes numerology, Kabbalah, things like that.
Pythagoras discovered that the mystery schools shared the belief that all of creation was at one with God.
He did a huge amount of explaining sacred mathematics by showing how the 1 splits and becomes 2, the 2 finds a synthesis and becomes 3, the 3 breaks open and becomes the 10,000 things. And that same story you read in the I Ching, you read in other metaphysical ancient documents, because everybody was trying to understand, how do we get number out of all?
Many credit Pythagoras and his school with the development of numerology and the efficient Greek alphabet eventually adopted by much of Western culture. Pythagoras also applied numbers to decode music, which Greeks regarded as the language of the gods. He invented the monochord, which defined the numerical ratios of the musical scale. Pythagoras believed he had solved the mysteries of the universe.
But there was also this idea that there was a music of the spheres, that the heavens itself was playing a sort of orchestral piece.
The planets themselves stack up around the sun at harmonic intervals. White light breaks out into color at harmonic intervals. Sound is also harmonically, the harmonic sequence that comes out of any given note, those nodes of overtones are all governed by the same mathematics. So it was Pythagoras who articulated harmonic math to the West.
Ultimately, the exclusivity of Pythagoras' school caused its downfall. In 508 BC, the school was burned to the ground.
There was a point at which his schools were attacked and destroyed and some of his followers killed. Pythagoras himself left and went off into the countryside and died, and no one really knows what happened. Some people think that he committed suicide, but it's a mystery. No one's really sure.
The society was hounded into extinction. Generations of later Greeks built upon Pythagoras' philosophy, and Aristotle turned it into science. But then came Christianity, and for the next 1,000 years, religion cast a long shadow over science and the occult. During the first 15 centuries of Christianity, occult knowledge was driven underground.
When the Judeo-Christian consolidation of Western spirituality became the enforced model, magic was really moved way off to the sidelines and became a dark and forbidden subject.
Priests were the intermediaries between people and the divine. Christianity also wielded unparalleled political influence.
The church had developed a hierarchy. It had developed the idea that the Pope took his word from God and then passed that down to the rest. And the church had also cemented itself with certain monarchs.
The church closely guarded its exclusive access to divine authority.
Like every other in-crowd group, if everybody can do it, then you can't claim that your guys are, special.
For centuries, Western Europe lived largely under church control.
In the Middle Ages, magic became a rebellious act perpetrated almost as an anti-Christian or an anti-authoritarian type of behavior.
The church singled out occultists, condemning them because they believed that an individual could have direct access to God.
They took the whole concept of church hierarchy, priests, the church itself, as a place of worship and said, no, you don't need any of this stuff. What you need is to work on discovering within yourself that divine spark.
But in the 14th century, the occult would rise again. Ironically, the church's holy war, the Crusades, was in part responsible. Monasteries to the east on the border of the Muslim world had preserved many of the ancient Greek and occult texts, studying them as curiosities. Returning crusaders brought a number of these documents back to Europe with them.
This learning started to trickle back, and little things were found in monasteries, a bit of scripture here, a bit of text there. And so the rumors were around that there had been greater learning in the past.
This rediscovery fueled an extraordinary rebirth of culture.
Well, this was the point. People began to realize, oh, there was wisdom amongst the ancients.
You have a new reverence for Egyptian and Greek and Roman and Hebraic tradition, because people are looking for really empowering knowledge and looking to understand the secrets of the ancients.
Art and science swept through Western Europe in the 1400s as it ushered in the Renaissance. Leading the movement into new ways of looking at old knowledge was the German physician Paracelsus. Born in Germany in 1493, Paracelsus trained in traditional medicine but also studied alchemy. Ultimately, forced out of school for challenging the status quo, he embarked on a nomadic life supporting himself with astrology readings. In his far-flung travels, he sought knowledge from any source he could find.
Paracelsus went around Europe and talked to barbers, talked to witches, talked to midwives, talked to, the village healer, and gathered together from everywhere what worked. And this was his huge final stance, is I use what works.
He rejected outworn theories, ventured beyond accepted boundaries. His pioneering experiments with minerals and chemicals laid the foundation for modern medicine. It was just the beginning of a scientific revolution. The next century would herald the discovery of an occult text that went against more than tradition. It was a threat to the power of the church.